David was a young boy who lived in a small village in Nigeria. He was 20 years old, the only child of his parents, and very smart. Everyone in the village called him the star of the family because he was so brilliant in his studies. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okoro, loved him so much. They didn't have much money, but they believed in David's future. His father worked as a farmer, and his mother sold vegetables in the market. They worked day and night just to save money to send David to a big university in the city. They often told him, "David, we are proud of you. You are the light of this family. Always remember to make good choices." David was excited to go to the university. It was his first time leaving the village, and his parents were both happy and worried. "Stay focused on your studies," his mother said, holding back tears. His father gave him a small Bible and said, "This will guide you. Don't forget where you come from." When David arrived at the university, everything was new and different. The city was big and noisy, with cars honking everywhere and tall buildings that seemed to touch the sky. David felt small, but he promised himself that he would make his parents proud. First, everything went well. David attended his classes, studied hard, and even became friends with some of his classmates. But soon, he started noticing some students who always seemed to have money, new clothes, and big phones. They were friendly and told him about enjoying life. One day, one of these boys, Tund, invited David to a party. "You've been working too hard. Come and relax. We're all friends here," Tund said with a big smile. David hesitated at first but decided to go. One party can't hurt, he thought. The party was loud, with music, drinks, and people dancing. David felt a little out of place, but everyone seemed so friendly. He didn't know that Tund and his friends were part of a secret group, a dangerous school cult. Over time, Tund and his friends started spending more time with David. They bought him gifts and treated him like family. "We look out for each other," they told him. David liked the attention and started skipping some classes to hang out with them. One day, Tund said to David, "You're like a brother to us now. We want you to join our group officially." David was confused. "What kind of group?" he asked. "It's nothing serious," Tund said. "We're just a brotherhood. We help each other. You'll never walk alone." David didn't fully understand what he was getting into, but he agreed because he didn't want to lose his new friends. That night, they took him to a secret meeting. It was dark, and they made him promise never to tell anyone about the group. David thought it was just a club, but it was much more dangerous than he imagined. After the meeting, David felt uneasy. They had made him swear an oath, and the things they said sounded strange. But every time he asked questions, Tund and the others laughed and said, "Relax, David. We're brothers now. You'll thank us later." At first, nothing changed much in David's life. His new friends gave him money, took him to expensive places, and made him feel important. They even helped him with some of his assignments. David began to enjoy the good life, forgetting the sacrifices his parents made to send him to school. But soon things started to change. One evening, Tund came to David's room with a serious look on his face. "David, we have a small problem," he said. "One of our rivals is trying to mess with us. We need you to come with us tonight." David didn't understand. "What do you mean, rivals?" he asked. "You'll see. Just trust us," Tund replied. That night, they took David to an abandoned building outside the campus. There were about 20 boys there, all wearing red and black bandanas. David realized this was not just a group of friends, it was a dangerous cult. David wanted to leave, but it was too late. The group leader, a tall, muscular boy named Razor, walked up to him and said, "You're one of us now. There's no going back." From that moment, David's life changed. The cult forced him to do things he didn't want to do. They made him skip classes to attend meetings. They gave him weapons and told him to be ready to fight their rivals. David became afraid, but he couldn't tell anyone. He remembered what his father said before he left home. Always make good choices. He felt ashamed of what he had done, but he didn't know how to escape. David's parents didn't know what was happening. They called him often, asking how school was going. "Everything is fine, Mama," David would say, trying to hide the fear in his voice. His mother would always reply, "We are praying for you, my son." But everything was not fine. David started failing his exams, and his lecturers noticed his absence. Some of his old friends tried to talk to him, but he pushed them away. The cult had taken over his life. One night, Razor told the group, "We are going to teach our rivals a lesson. Everyone must come." David didn't want to go, but he knew the rules. If you disobeyed, they would punish you. Some boys who tried to leave the cult were beaten up badly or even killed. David felt trapped. The night of the clash was chaotic. David and the cult members met their rivals in a dark alley near the campus. Both groups were armed with sticks, bottles, and knives. What started as shouting quickly turned into a violent fight. David tried to stay at the back, hoping not to get involved. But suddenly, someone shouted his name. He turned and saw one of the rival members running toward him with a knife. Before David could react, everything went dark. The next morning, the village was quiet as always, but something felt wrong in the Okoro household. Mrs. Okoro was sweeping the front yard when she heard her phone ring. It was unusual to get calls this early in the day. "Hello?" she answered, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder as she continued sweeping. "Is this David's mother?" a deep voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Who is speaking?" she replied, her heart beating faster. "This is the student affairs officer of David's university. Ma, we need you and your husband to come to the campus immediately." Mrs. Okoro froze. She could hear the seriousness in the man's voice. "What happened? Is my son okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Please, Ma, it's better you come here first. I will explain everything when you arrive." The man replied and ended the call. She dropped the broom and ran into the house, shouting, "Papa David, something is wrong with our son. We need to go to the city now." After David's death, the university tightened its rules against cultism. Lecturers and staff began working with security forces to eliminate cult groups on campus. They held seminars to educate students about the dangers of bad company and poor choices. Back in the village, Mr. and Mrs. Okoro spent their days mourning their only child. They often sat together in silence, staring at the empty chair where David used to sit. One day, a neighbor visited them and said, "You may not see it now, but David's story has touched many lives. His mistake has taught others to stay on the right path." Though it brought little comfort, they hoped their son's tragedy would prevent other parents from experiencing the same pain. Months passed, but David's death continued to haunt the village. People couldn't stop talking about how such a promising boy had fallen into the wrong hands. Some blamed the university. Others whispered that his parents should have been more watchful. How could they send a boy from the village to a city filled with temptations? An elder muttered during a village meeting. "That's unfair," another elder replied. The Okoros sacrificed everything to give their son a chance. The boy made his own choices. The debate created a rift in the community. Some villagers sympathized with the Okoros, while others used the tragedy to warn their own children. In the middle of the gossip and blame, Mrs. Okoro grew quieter each day. She stopped going to the market and barely spoke to anyone. Her once lively spirit was replaced with a heavy sadness. But one night something unusual happened. It was late and the village was dark. Only the faint sound of crickets and distant voices could be heard. Mr. and Mrs. Okoro were sitting outside their small house, staring at the stars. Suddenly, a shadow appeared at their gate. It was a man, tall and slim, dressed in a long black robe. He carried a wooden staff, and his face was partly hidden by the hood of his robe. "Good evening," the man said in a deep, calm voice. "Who are you?" Mr. Okoro asked, standing protectively in front of his wife. "I am a messenger," the man replied, his voice steady. "I have come with a warning." Mrs. Okoro sat up straight, her heart pounding. "A warning? What kind of warning?" The man looked at them both, his eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. "David's story is not over. His soul cries out for justice. The path he walked was not entirely his doing. There is more to uncover." "What do you mean?" Mr. Okoro asked, his voice shaking. "There are people, powerful people, behind the cult that took your son's life. If you do not act, more young boys will suffer the same fate. The battle is not over. The mysterious man left as quietly as he came, leaving behind a mix of fear and curiosity. What should we do? Mrs. Okoro asked her husband after hours of silence. We must find the truth, he said firmly. If there are others who forced David into this life, we cannot let them destroy more families. The next day, they went to the village chief, who agreed to help them find answers. Together, they decided to visit David's university to meet anyone who might know more about his involvement with the cult. When they arrived, they met a young man named Chaik, one of David's old friends. Chaik looked nervous but agreed to talk. I warned David, Chaik said, lowering his voice, but they had already trapped him. Those cults are not just about students. There are powerful people funding them, businessmen, even politicians. The revelation shocked the Okoros. Why would anyone support something so evil? Mrs. Okoro asked, tears in her eyes. For control, Chaik replied. They use students to carry out their dirty work, smuggling, violence, even threats. Once you join, you can't leave. The Okoros realized they were facing something bigger than they had imagined. But they couldn't turn back. We have to stop this, Mr. Okoro said. If we don't, more families will lose their children like we lost David. With the help of the village chief, they began gathering evidence. They spoke to other students, former cult members, and even lecturers who were too scared to speak out publicly. But their actions didn't go unnoticed. One night, a threatening letter was left at their door. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. The Okoros were shaken by the threat but refused to give up. With the village chief's encouragement, they contacted a journalist known for exposing corruption. The journalist, Mr. Ade, agreed to help. This is risky, Mr. Ade warned. But if we can expose the powerful people behind these cults, we might save lives. Together, they gathered more evidence and interviewed students who had escaped the cult. Mr. Ade published a powerful story in a major newspaper, naming some of the businessmen and politicians linked to the cults. The story created an uproar. Universities across the country began investigating cult activities, and law enforcement agencies arrested several suspects. The pressure forced some powerful figures to step down, and the university where David studied took stricter measures to prevent cultism. Though the battle was far from over, the Okoros found comfort in knowing they had turned their pain into something meaningful. Their courage inspired other parents to speak out, and many students left the cults after seeing the consequences of David's story. One day, as Mrs. Okoro sat by David's grave, she whispered, "My son, your life may have been short, but it was not in vain. You saved others." The village remembered David not just as a victim but as a symbol of hope and change. If you enjoyed this story, kindly encourage us by subscribing to our channel. Give this video a like and drop your comment as we load you with amazing true life stories at Brave Stories 24/7. Thank you for your support.